Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of my podcast, Grit Stories of Resilience. You may wonder why this podcast that is new this week is for the last time about the 42nd Street Oyster Bar, as I have done a number of them this month. I suppose, honestly, that that's because I have had a tough time letting go. It's not letting go of a restaurant or the oysters or the shrimp or the food or the building or any of that sort of thing. It's more of an idea that the oyster bar became for me. It was an idea where I could go or talk about and reminisce in my own mind a time some years ago when I was younger, not young, but younger, and trying to find my footing after having spent most of my life as a lawyer or someone who wanted to be a lawyer. And all of a sudden, I had to learn how to be first a host and then a waiter. You know, waiting tables is a young person's job. They're quicker, they're faster, they can carry more plates, they can remember things more quickly, and they just move with more speed. At the same time, there's something to be said for waiting tables as a place that's a great equalizer. You know, you start the night off, everybody gets a table or a section. Whoever sits in your section or table is randomly selected. In other words, there's a level playing field, and you get your chance to do the best you can. And you know, suppose back then in the 90s, if I made 115 bucks one night, but somebody that was younger made 125, so what? That's pretty good for me. And for the most part, I was able to compete and do well. It took some time. You would never mistake me for fine dining. You never would. However, if you wanted to enjoy yourself, have a good time, have a waiter or waitress who would laugh with you a little bit at your jokes or your comments or your thoughts, be flexible as to what you could have, be prompt on getting you real refills of drinks, that sort of thing, then maybe you would give me a second look. Another reason for doing this podcast today is just this past week, I got a text from a long-time friend of mine. I knew her first when she was a teenager. She's the older daughter of my longtime friend, Senator Robert Morgan, who passed away in the summer of 2016. He had given me my first job. He had been instrumental in my becoming an assistant United States attorney and then subsequently United States attorney. And then when I was in difficulty, he stood by me, came to my sentencing hearing in court, and made it okay and available and safe for me to work in his law office in downtown Raleigh when I was on work release. I still remember one day when he wanted to walk over to the Wake County Courthouse, which was actually, it was just about a block away. He wanted me to go with him. And I didn't want to go. He said, why not? I said, well, and I called him Robert by that time. I said, Robert, you know, I uh, I just a little skittish and nervous about seeing lawyers right now and how they will react to me. He looked at me and he said, let me tell you something, Jim. If you go with me, they will be nice to you. I promise you that, because they will, by God, be nice to me. And I will make certain that they're nice to you. And you need to do this, and I want to help you do this. And so we went. He was right. He was there in good times, in bad. When the book Fatal Vision was published in 1983, I believe, becoming a New York Times bestseller, he was as proud as he could be. When I was in trouble, he stood by me, and then he was happy and proud when I finished my work release with him. So when I got a text this past week from Margaret Morgan, his older daughter, and a lawyer, it said something like this: Jim, I know the Oyster Bar is closing. Do you think you could get Daddy's license tag and give it to me? I really would like to have it. You see, the Oyster Bar had a reputation and a practice of putting license tags on the wall of prominent people, and maybe some not so prominent. And Robert Morgan's license tag from 1975 was up there when he was in his first full year as a United States Senator from North Carolina. It was in red on white, an outline of the state of North Carolina, and in the middle was the big number 2, U.S. Senator, and his name was under it. I called and spoke with Brad Hurley, the owner. He assured me he would get it as soon as we closed at the end of March, and indeed the first week of April. Now I have it to give to Margaret. I was there one night at the Oyster Bar when Robert was still alive, at a small gathering of friends and associates, as it was finding its way onto the wall for the first or second night. And we had sort of a mini celebration. So when I got the license tag back and have it now to give to Margaret, it really hit me as coming home that this is all over. I'm reminded, though, of a speech given a long time ago. I think it was in the 1980s. It may have been the summer of 1980, when Senator Ted Kennedy was running for the presidency against Jimmy Carter, and he was losing. And at the Democratic National Convention, he made a speech, and he ends the speech with the words, and I'm certainly paraphrasing this: the fight goes on, the dream still lives. And so the dream of what became for me a place to start over, to begin again, essentially to learn how to do everything all over again, still continues, regardless of whether the building is a seafood restaurant or something else, or whether it even ceases to exist at all. This much was made clear to me these last 3.5 weeks, when I went down the first night to the Oyster Bar to get a table or an island at the Oyster Bar for dinner, I was told by my daughter, Stacy, who worked there, and she was sort of in charge of the front desk of everybody coming in. She said, Dad, if you want to get in, we're not taking any reservations any longer. You're going to have to get there at least an hour early. We open at 5 o'clock during the week. You don't need to be here any later than 4 o'clock, 4:15 at the very latest. That's the latest you can get a parking place. They had a small parking lot, and you'll have to be in line. But if you do that, I'll see what I can do to help you out. I told people that they would have to join me at that early hour if they wanted to get in. Nobody believed me. I didn't believe me. I didn't believe my daughter. I thought she was exaggerating. So I go down there, and sure enough, I'm in line. I'm there at 4:15. We don't get to go inside to the lobby until 4:30. And all we do when we go inside the lobby at 4:30 is stand in line and wait to get to the front desk to get a place, perhaps to sit at the Oyster Bar itself on a stool on an island which has 5 or 6 stools, a table at the lounge, but you can only stay there for an hour and a half, or in the dining room where you can stay as long as you want. I got a table at the Oyster Bar Islands, which was great because several people there wanted steamed oysters. And you can only get steamed oysters at the Oyster Bar. And 42nd Street is one of the few places in this area that even serves steamed oysters. So all was well. And then I saw it. It was like a horde coming in. People came. It's like Field of Dreams in the baseball field. If you build it, they will come. Well, the Oyster Bar has already been built and there since 1987. But if the word got out that it was closing, people came. They wanted to come for one last meal, one last walk around the building, taking perhaps some pictures. I was like a tourist. I know almost every inch of the inside of that building and have for years. I spent a number of years working there in the 1990s and a year in the early 2000s. And yet, I was like a tourist in another land as I walked around with my iPhone camera, taking pictures of the dining room, the Oyster Bar, people, the clock, everything, making my own memories. I wanted to remember what it looked like. In particular, what it looked like when it was full. For in the 1990s, when I worked there, it was full all the time. Thursdays was the big night back then. You would go in there on Thursday and you'd have to wait outside. They would have police handling the traffic coming in. Cocktail waitresses walking around with bottles of beer in their back pockets, pulling them out and asking for the money and giving you the beer and snapping the top off. So, way to make money, hand over fist. On a good night back then, I could turn a table 5 times, quitting no sooner than quarter of 11 or 11 o'clock during the weeknight, close to midnight on weekends. The big nights to make money were Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Sunday was family night. Monday was a little slow. It started to build up as you got to Tuesday during the week. It was the only game in town back then, and it was really something. I didn't know if I would ever come back after I left that first night, and then I did. And then I did again and again and again. It was like some force was pulling me back in, and I went 5 times, 5 separate times. The last one being Sunday night, March the 30th. I did not know whether I wanted to go or not, or how I would feel, or whether I would see anybody there, or whether it would be so packed it would be uncontrollable. I got there a little early. There was a line out the door and down by the side of the building, as there had been every night. It turned out to be packed. The first person there had come, and I think with a table and some drinks. He got there at 9:30 or 10 in the morning. This was about 3 o'clock or 3:15. It was going to open at 4 on the weekends, which Sunday was counted as a weekend night. The second or third lady there, I was talking with them, and finally she said that her father used to come there a lot. And I thought, well, I wondered who her father was. Maybe I knew him. She said, my father was Beverly Lake. He was Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. And I stood and looked at her blankly and said, your father was Beverly Lake? Yes. Did you know him? Oh, yeah, I knew him. I knew your grandfather, too. I knew your grandfather's second wife, Kathleen. And she looked at, who are you? And then I told her, and she said, oh, my God. Beverly Lake lived in the town of Wake Forest, where his funeral service was held several years ago, in the same church where my father had once been its minister. All this happening at 42nd Street. And then an SUV rolls up. It's about 03:15. And I hear my name yelled out by someone in the front passenger side of the front seat. Jim Blackburn. I looked over there and I recognized a crowd of people whom I had not seen in a long, long time. There was Pete and his wife, Christine, who had flown in a day or two before from Colorado, for gosh sakes. Christine had been a manager at the Oyster Bar. Actually, she was my first manager when I was hosting. And then she became a bartender. She was such a good bartender. She was a strong person. She had one of her children. I think I've said this before on the podcast. She had one of her children and within hours was back at the Oyster Bar working as a bartender behind the bar. We had texted during the week prior that I knew she was coming. And she said, Jim, I need to tell you my favorite JB story. I remember the time I was working as a manager in the dining room. You were waiting tables. And a couple said that they thought you had had their credit card for at least 10 minutes and hadn't come back. Could I go find you? And you found me. I found you, Jim. And I said, they think you've had it for 10 minutes. And I laughed. I said, no, it's not been 10 minutes. She said, oh, good. It's more like 20 to 25 minutes. And then she said, and then she wrote, I scampered off. She said, it was classic Jim Blackburn. And the most amazing thing, she went back to the table and they were just fine with it. They were happy with it. They weren't upset at all. They said thank you and were just as nice to me as they could. How that happened and how that got away with that kind of stuff, I will never, ever know. But it did. And then Holly Bain. He had married Cliff Vogelsberg, the sous chef. She had had a couple of kids. When I knew her, she was just Holly. Bouncy, refreshing, reminded me of Carol Burnett when she would pull on her ear and twinkle. Smart as a whip, knew Mandarin Chinese. She whispers at me later on in the evening. She said, Jim, she says, come here. I leaned up near her in the oyster bar. She says, you know I love you, but I got to tell you something. You have your sweater on backwards. Oh, my God. You want to go to the restroom and change? No, I'll just take it off right here in the oyster bar, which I did and put it back on straight. I said, I kept worrying about that. She just started laughing. I mentioned it to my daughter, Stacy, and she just looked at me. She said, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. And then there was Lorraine. Lorraine, who, when I knew her so well back then, was 27 years old. We were great friends in the oyster bar, competed against each other all the time, laughed with each other, kidded each other, but we absolutely did have each other's back if the other was in difficulty with overseating or any of that kind of thing. She has a daughter now, 13 or 14 years old, who's a wonderful singer and performer. And we're going to hear from her daughter one day, I am certain. And then there was Sue Sullivan. Sue came from Cape Cod, left her family in the Boston area and flew to Raleigh simply to attend this reunion of the last night of people who had once worked at 42nd Street. And she whispers to me, she said, Jim, I will always be grateful to you because you were one of the first connections that I made down here. And it made me feel at home. And Jim, you need to know, you mailed me and you sent me a copy of your book many years ago up here in Boston, for goodness sakes. Maybe I'll come back again. We can have a drink. Who knows? She took so many pictures. Was such a great person. People came from everywhere. It was like a high school reunion that Sunday night. Everyone was happy. I didn't see a tear. I didn't see sad moments. I saw happy times. People stood in line to buy paraphernalia, sweatshirts, t-shirts, koozies, everything. Cocktail napkins, for goodness sakes. Everything was for sale. Richard Millender, a former manager there, was trying to talk to me about trying to figure out a way we could get more paraphernalia and sell them at a discount and make some money. I just laughed and said, you need to have another drink, Richard. He said, I'm staying over here at the Holiday Inn in case things get too wild. I'll go back to Wilson and I'll just stay here and spend the night. It was Chris Morgan, the manager, who was one of the first managers I worked for, comes up to me, doesn't miss a beat, and he says, Jim, when I think of you, I still remember the time that you were cutting up as your side work for the day at lunch, lemons, a box of lemons you had to cut up with this automatic cutter. You did by hand, not a machine. It was a machine, but you did it by hand. And we cut lemons into little pieces that you garnished on the plate. And you were having a difficult time. And you said, why is it going so slow for you, Jim? And I looked at the box and I said, Jim, I said, yes, you're cutting up oranges, not lemons. I said, are you serious? Yes. Oranges are a lot tougher to cut up, and we don't need you to cut up oranges. We don't need those at all. Take these back to the cooler and get a box of lemons. About that time, the chef, Mark Edelbaum, comes up. Mark is a take no prisoners, no sense of humor, rough chef from New York City. But Mark sort of liked me. As I told Brad, we had a love relationship, I suppose. And this day it had tended towards love. He looked at me and he just shook his head and said, well, I guess it's a learning experience. Brad always said, if it was like, if that saying, if mama's happy, everybody's happy. If mama's not happy, nobody's happy. Well, that was the way the oyster bar was with Chef Mark Edelbaum. He was the first chef they had. He was hired by Thad Europe because he promised he could get the food out quickly, and that he could. And he knew how to make exceptional food dishes. As the night wore on, more people came. 3 ladies who were sisters, who were cocktail waitresses, when I was there. That's where you made the money, by the way, not in the dining room, but as a cocktail waitress. They were the ones where the wine and the beer could flow quickly and the taps could run up quickly and they could just turn the tables so darn fast. You know, I remember so many people and everybody was doing well. They had gotten married, they had had children, they had taken new jobs, they had moved out of state. There was one young girl, and when I first looked at her, I couldn't place her, but she knew me and remembered me, and I was trying to remember. Then all of a sudden it hit me. She was in college at NC State when she was in school there. And she waited tables at the Oyster Bar for 5 years, working her way through NC State and graduated and was now doing well. The only time that Brad got emotionally upset during his podcast with me last week was when I asked him the question, what is your greatest memory from this time at 42nd Street? And he said it was that so many people who had worked through there, who had come through there as servers and wait staff and bus boys and even people who worked in the kitchen, the cooks, they had gone on to do greater things. One of his chefs, Dave, now owns a restaurant called Forks Cafeteria in the town of Wake Forest. And Larry, his mother and stepfather, both once worked at the Oyster, or Mr. Sam and Miss Maggie. She did the soups, and Mr. Sam had a cart pushing around oysters and shrimp for people to eat in the lounge. He's probably the best employee that in all the 38 years at the Oyster Bar has ever had. He could steam oysters. He could do anything. He could manage when they needed a manager for the night. He was wonderful with people. Everybody loved Larry. I asked him what he was going to do now that the place was closing. He said it will be the first time I've been free on a Saturday night in 38 years because the cafeteria in Wake Forest, where he works now with Dave, is closed on Saturday. I said, Larry, within 30 days, you're going to be driving yourself crazy to get out. He laughed. He said, with his shoulders sort of jumping up and down as he laughed, he said, you may be right. We'll see. If you think of a place like this as a home, as an idea, you're onto something. I asked Brad, how did the Oyster Bar become what it became? There are lots of restaurants in lots of towns and cities all over the United States. In this part of the state, how did you get the reputation for being an iconic place to go where if you were taking people from out of town, you would go there because it was different. It was unique. It was not like any restaurant you would see anywhere else in North Carolina. None. How did you do that? He said, well, Jim, from Monday through Thursday, the work week, we got lots of people from Raleigh who would come here after work for a cocktail, for a beer, on the way home, and then they would come back with their families for dinner on another night. Weekends, we became a destination. If you're going to Raleigh for any particular reason, from east or south, east or west, we would become one of the places where you would want to go. We were so different. We had so much food. We had steaks. We had seafood. We had oysters. We had shrimp. We could do oysters any different way you wanted to, with pasta, anything you wanted to do. I said, Brand, this is a long time ago. I said, I love your desserts you have. You had the belly popper. The belly popper. They haven't had it in a long time. It was like a giant sundae. I mean, one person, it was well named. One person could eat it all. It had to take 2 or 3 people to eat the darn thing. They had banana splits. Banana splits, for goodness sakes. At one time, they had RC colas and moon pies and peanuts that you could put in your drink. Initially, the ice cream was Haagen-Dazs. The silverware oftentimes would be magnetic, and children or adults, if they wanted to, could, move the silverware around on the table and they would stick together. Cooks were served not in a glass from a gun, pouring the Coke into the glass, but in a bottle, a little bottle. How cool is that? It was different. It was unique. They had fish all over the walls. And a great trick was to know what each fish was. More times than I can remember, a customer would say, Jim, can you tell me what that fish is? And I learned how to do that, so I knew them. And so there were pictures, black and white pictures, all over the place. Scenes, many in Raleigh. There were cab companies. And the person who owned the cab companies and the cabs had sent some pictures over. There were pictures of everyday life from a long time ago, from the past. It was a trip down memory lane if you would go inside. There's been a great wonderment as to the fact that when the Oyster Bar is closing, the building is owned by one entity, but the parking lot is owned by Brad and his partner, John Vick. And I asked why that was so. He said, well, that's because the original Oyster Bar, which was a small building, was on the corner of Jones and West Street in the area that is now the parking lot. And Thad Ewer bought that property. And so there are 2 distinct real estate pieces of property there. I don't know what's going to happen to there, but that explains why the parking lot is owned by one group, Brad and John, the building itself by someone else. Who knows what's going to happen with all the tables and the chairs and the bars and the lights and the clock. What's going to happen to all that? That's still all to be determined as we go through the next few weeks and months. But there will always be that time when it will be 1987 again. And I will call up the Oyster Bar and speak to Janet Maui, the hostess on duty, the manager on duty, and ask her how long the wait is. Do I need to make reservations for lunch? They had great lunches. And she said, no, if you'll just come on down, we'll squeeze you in. And they oftentimes would be full at lunch. Seafood got expensive. Believe it or not, more expensive than it is even now. And they stopped serving lunch after a while and strictly went just to dinner. My lunch at the time was always fried popcorn shrimp, saucer of slaw, and a cheese potato and iced tea. That was it. Never changed. I would only change later when I would maybe feel guilty. I would get a salad, which I ate, I guess, because I thought I was supposed to, and a cup of clam chowder, which was really good. The last time I had soup there, though, I rebelled and got the bisque soup because I thought that was just as good, and I hadn't had it, in a long time. And a cheese potato, which was so good, or the mashed potatoes, which were homemade, or some of their desserts. Though I must confess and tell you, I don't know that the desserts were as good as they once were. I asked Brad one time why you didn't spend more money and more effort on getting different types of desserts and bring them around on a tray like so many restaurants do. He said, well, Jim, that's because, we don't necessarily want people to linger forever. Here, we want them to have a nice meal, enjoy themselves, and then make way for the next group that comes in. That's was our business plan. We didn't we wanted people to stay. We wouldn't ask them to leave. We never asked them to leave, but we didn't want be a place where people would stay 3 and 4 hours. We wanted maybe an hour, hour 15, 20 minutes, hour and a half tops. Okay. You learn so much about how to manage a restaurant. It's where I met so many people and saw so many people. I think over the years, almost every person I knew well came through those doors. Initially, perhaps they were coming just to see if I was working there. And then I think, they came because they wanted to have a good time and a good meal. Maybe I could wait on them. I remember so many times Earl Britt, who's a United States District Judge based in Raleigh. He originally was from the Lumberton, Robeson County area. His brother had been Speaker of the House of Representatives, David Britt, at one time. He'd been a judge since I had become United States Attorney back in the uh, early 1980s. He would come with his clerk, oftentimes on a Sunday night, and he'd see me in there and speak to me. And he said, Jim, I've asked the host, we're going to wait until you're available and you have a table available so I can sit with you. He did that, not just because he wanted to say hello, but I believe he did that in order that he could leave me a tip, which was an expression of support. It's just amazing. You see, the random acts of kindness were practiced not just with me, but with lots of people there. You would see waitstaff being kind and nice to customers, to going the extra mile, to trying to see if they could be flexible and give them something that they wanted to have. Everybody wanted them to enjoy themselves and have a good time. Everybody smiled. You wanted it to be a happy place. That's not to say there's not a lot of stress there. Sometimes if I work 4 or 5 straight nights in a row, I would think I'm going to go absolutely start raving crazy if I can't leave this building because it'd gotten so tough night after night after night. But one night off and I was ready to go back and put on my uniform. When I first started working there, Brad said to me, Jim, we're going to make you a host and you can wear a nice coat and tie. You won't have to wear the uniform. And then when I became a waiter, Keith Nye, who was the manager at that time, said to me, he said, Jim, if you wait tables, you're going to have to wear a uniform. I said, well, I can do that. I knew these wait staff people in many cases well because I had been there as a customer so many times. And so the first night that I worked, not as a waiter, but as a host, I walked up to the dining room, took a party. I don't know who it was. I don't remember. whether it was two or three or four, gave them their menus, told them to have a nice meal, and turned around and walked back to the hostess stand. As I did, I looked around the oyster bar and I saw a number of people looking in absolute amazement that I was there working alongside of them. That was my first step back. A couple of nights go by, nobody thinks anything of it. Nobody. More nights go by, I'm becoming one of the gang. They invite me to sit down with them after work and have a glass of wine or some shrimp and just talk. They say sometimes, Jim, we're going to go over here to this local bar a couple blocks away called Havana's. You want to come? I said, sure, where is it? And I went. Would have another drink. We'd throw darts and we would talk and laugh and tell stories. All the stories were always about the night that you just had at the Oyster Bar. This is why I learned, and I have said so often, the best people in the world are young people and older people. The young are great because they don't really care about your past. They just care how you're doing right now. And the older people are nice because they've lived long enough to recognize that everybody makes mistakes. Indeed, they may have made some themselves, and it's okay. And they're quick to forgive. It's always been, I think, the people in the middle that are the toughest on you. But the idea of having a place of work that's created so people want to come back. I don't know how many people from the alumni reunion, so to speak, of the Oyster Bar wait staff were there, but I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't run in the neighborhood of 40, 50, 60 people. That's not, of course, the number of people who work there, but I can't tell you the number of texts and notes and emails people have gotten saying, oh my God, I wished I could have been there. I wished I'd been right there. That's the way everybody has felt. So I'm reminded of what Sue Sullivan, the young lady who came from Boston, wrote in an email after she was there. She put it on her Facebook page, in which she said what a good time she'd had. She hoped to come back one day. But in the meantime, she wanted to tell the Oyster Bar goodbye and what it had meant to her. That they had received and accepted her as somebody from out of state, from up north, with open arms. That's the way the Oyster Bar treated its customers. That's why they succeeded. That's why people came. They came not because of the building, though the building was cool, but they came because of the attitude of how they would be treated once they walked inside and became one of their customers. One of the signs on the wall says, to our customers, the most important people we have. And that's it. That's why they succeeded. You know, it's true that sometimes you don't know what you have until you run the risk of not having it anymore. I think that's why the lines were packed every night for 3.5 weeks. People realized what was going away, and they wanted the chance or the opportunity to have it one last time. Thanks very much. I hope you've enjoyed it. This is a different take on 42nd Street, my time there, the closing and its doors. Take care, and we'll see you again next week.